Donald Trump had what was a pretty good weekend for his presidency until, of course, the Texas flood happened. But one of the sort of blemishes, if you will, on it was that he was very, very disappointed by his phone call with Russia's Vladimir Putin as yet another attempt to move towards a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine seems to have come and gone quite fruitlessly. So here he is.
And are you still speaking? Are you speaking to Zelensky tomorrow? And what are you hoping?
I'm speaking to President Zelensky tomorrow, early in the morning, and I'm very disappointed with the conversation I had today with President Putin because I don't think he's there. I don't think he's there, and I'm very disappointed. Well, it's not. I'm just saying, I don't think he's looking to stop, and that's too bad.
Yeah, that is too bad, I would say. No deal. Trump says he's not happy and didn't make any progress in yesterday's phone call with Putin. Here he is the next morning.
It was
the
a
next
pretty
evening,
long
rather.
call. We talked about a lot of things, including Iran, and we also talked about, as you know, the war with Ukraine. And I'm not happy about that. I'm not happy.
Did you find any progress with him on a deal with Ukraine? Do you feel like you made any progress with him?
No, I didn't make any progress with him today at all.
Well, that is refreshingly honest, I suppose. Russia pummels Kyiv with drones and missiles after Putin-Trump call. So this seems like Putin kind of adding insult to injury here, making a point to ramp up his campaign after that quote-unquote disappointing call with Donald Trump. Heavy smoke choked central Kyiv on Friday after Russia launched its biggest aerial assault in its war against Ukraine, as Russian President Vladimir Putin showed no indication of wanting to end hostilities after a conversation with President Donald Trump. Russian forces pummeled Ukraine with 539 drones and 11 missiles, with the main direction of the strike targeting Kyiv, Ukraine's Air Force said in a statement. That barrage surpassed the previous record made Sunday when Moscow hit Ukraine with a total of 537 missiles and drones. At least one person has been found dead so far, and there are more than 24 injured. So Zelensky tweeted the following after that night of bombardment. Firefighting efforts and debris removal are still ongoing after another Russian strike. This was one of the most large-scale air attacks, deliberately massive and cynical. In total, 550 targets were launched, including at least 330 Russian-Iranian Shaheds, along with missiles, including ballistic ones. Notably, the first air raid alerts in our cities and regions yesterday began to blare almost simultaneously with media reports discussing a phone call between President Trump and Putin. Yet again, Russia is showing it has no intention of ending the war and terror. Only around 9 a.m. today did the air raid alert end in Kyiv. It was a brutal, sleepless night. So he posts the following videos and photos. We'll play a video here showing some of the damage. All a real waste, all a real shame. Here's some more photos from his tweet. Pretty terrible stuff. Trump spoke with Zelensky by phone Friday after the latest aerial attacks. They discussed increasing the protection of the sky over Ukraine and potential joint weapons production, Zelensky said in a statement. The call came at a fraught moment. This week, the United States said it was reviewing its weapons supplies and pausing the delivery of several key weapon systems to Ukraine promised by the previous administration, including air defense. NATO chief Mark Rutte said Friday that allies recognize Washington's need to maintain its stocks, but hope to ensure Ukraine keeps getting military supplies. I totally understand for the U.S. to make sure that the stockpiles are at a level that we have the collective defense we need, he told reporters. At the same time, of course, we all hope for a level of flexibility to make sure that also Ukraine has what it needs. He said the weight of backing Ukraine was already shifting to European allies. Kyiv's main European backers have sought to mobilize weapons and cash to calibrate to a U.S. administration that has shown no interest in sending Ukraine weapons, as aid approved during the Biden era is expected to run out. Yet European nations are facing shortages and lagging in key capabilities, such as the air defense systems Kyiv has been scouting for, including U.S.-made Patriot missiles. U.S. officials have also pointed to global supply issues with production of Patriot systems slower than demand. Now, Trump, let's not forget, touted as a big win at the NATO conference, at the NATO summit, the agreement from European NATO allies to increase their defense spending to, I guess, take some of the burden off of the United States. A NATO summit designed to please President Trump ended on Wednesday with his European allies approving an ambitious spending goal to meet the threat of a militarizing Russia and clinching a long elusive public commitment from the mercurial American leader for the alliance's collective defense. Since his first term, Mr. Trump has been pressing for the allies to spend more on their own defense. On Wednesday, after a one-day meeting in the Netherlands, they agreed to raise their spending on the military to 5% of their national income by 2035. That amount consists of 3.5% on traditional military needs like troops, weapons, shells, and missiles, up sharply from the current target of 2%. Spain, by the way, said they'd go as high as 2.1%. Not anymore. Pretty based place. So not all of the European allies agreed to up it to 5%, but some did. It also includes another 1.5% on militarily adjacent projects like improved roads and bridges, better emergency health care, better cybersecurity, and civic resilience. Mr. Trump was pleased. So here are some of his remarks touting the increase in military budgets from some of our NATO allies.
2 days I was honored to participate in the NATO leaders meeting and also had extremely good individual discussions with the King and the Queen, Secretary General Rutte, and the Prime Minister. Great discussions, very knowledgeable people. Major focus of our conversations at the summit was the need for other NATO members to take up the burden of the defense of Europe, and that included the financial burden. As you know, it was 2%, and we got it up to 5%. And they said, a couple of them came up to me. One in particular said, "Sir, we've been trying to get it up to 3% for 20 years, and we haven't been able, and you got it up to 5%.
Okay, so not only is the Russia-Ukraine war not winding down, we're, I think, further from a peace deal than at any point during the war.
Yeah.
These Russian attacks keep escalating more and more. You saw clearly Vladimir Putin sending a message to Donald Trump that he and only he, meaning Putin himself, would determine when this war ends. I mean, they said the alerts for the incoming strikes happened pretty much at the same time that Putin and Trump got off of the phone. That is an unmistakable fuck you to the United States from Russia. Not only that, but I always thought
it's almost like Donald Trump is a joke to Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, it's almost like Vladimir Putin doesn't take him seriously. I wonder why. I wonder why. But, another piece of this, and I thought of this because, Trump has always said that he wants the NATO allies to pay more, right? And he's always sort of approached this, in a very transactional way. When you think about it, okay, if Russia keeps attacking Ukraine and there's no ceasefire in sight, and the United States says we're not sending any more weapons, I mean, don't you think that might be Donald Trump's way of squeezing the NATO allies to increase their military funding so that they stop ripping us off, right? Like, if you wanted to be conspiratorial about it, you could say, hey, if Europe wants to keep fighting and Russia won't stop fighting, then if we stop funding Ukraine, that's going to force these NATO allies to increase their military spending.
Oh, I don't think that's conspiratorial. I
Yeah.
think that's exactly right. I think it's kind of obvious.
Yeah. So it seems like what? He realizes the war's not going to end, but I'm going to use this to get the NATO allies to pitch in more for their military spending, which, you may from a nationalist perspective be like, good. It's about time they start paying their fair share. All right, fine. Like if that's what you really think is important, you really think that these European countries raising their military spending by 3%, you really think that's important, then God bless you. But whatever your preference is, however you approach that issue, that's certainly not an anti-war position. Like he is essentially forcing NATO to militarize further. He is trying to militarize Europe more. No? Am I crazy? Am I wrong? That's the effect that this is having. You have no ceasefire. You have a ceasefire further away than it ever was. And because the United States is pulling back without ending the war, now Europe has to militarize even more. How does this make the world safer or more peaceful? This doesn't seem very peace candidate-like to me. It seems like the fighting is worse than ever and that Europe is becoming more militarized than ever.
No, it has nothing to do with peace. Trump either doesn't know or doesn't care that the reason that we have offered this defense umbrella to Europe, if not by treaty, in fact, is in order to have power over them, in order to maintain them as a vassal state. Because if you're entirely dependent on the United States for your defense, well, how much leverage do you have in dictating the course of geopolitical events, right? By doing what he's doing now, he is really reinvigorating and reestablishing Europe as an independent global power in a way that it hasn't been since the end of World War II. Now, Trump seems to feel that our markets are so valuable that people are going to need to come to us anyway to make deals, and we don't need to offer them that security umbrella in order to have that kind of control over world events. I don't think he's right about that, but I think at best, like if you want to give him credit of having even thought through that aspect of it, that's what he's thinking. What do we need to have all this military over there? They're going to have to deal with us anyway. They're still not going to be able to do anything. And probably, frankly, he probably sees them as pussies who won't act without the United States regardless.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that's probably right. And in the meantime, what a shit show and what a tragic loss of life on both sides. I mean, just hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, well over 1 million at this point.
Well, the fact that the Europeans just won't let this go.
He won't let this go. What, are you crazy?
Jesus. Yeah. I mean, with the Americans pulling out, really, you're going to remilitarize. Europe is very much the inheritor of literally over a millennium of war-induced trauma.
Yeah.
That sure, it's because the United States offered that umbrella that they were able to move into this kind of post-war mindset where they're just going to run their countries based on the social good and essentially demilitarize. So what are you doing? What are you doing, man? Like you're going to go back to that now? You're
going to go really back afraid Russia's going to take them next? Like that's so
seriously?
Absurd. Yeah.
Like seriously? Like really? Why don't you just say, okay, America, take your ball and go home? And we're also not going to remilitarize.
Right.
Who's going to invade Europe? Really? Putin. Putin's
right.
he's gonna go sweep through Europe. That's part of his ambition. I think in an ideal world, Putin might want to bring back what he sees as Russia's historic territory, which of course is not as simple as what he presented to Tucker. These territories changed hands over the centuries between the Austro-Hungarian Empire, between the Russian Empire. They were constantly getting traded around. That's why most nationalism didn't really develop until borders started to harden, because you might be part of one country one year, one country another year, people identified by the village that they were from as being their identity. But ultimately Putin is a very smart, calculating guy. He knows what kind of a shitstorm it would start if he, say, went into Poland. He's not
Right.
going to do it. He's not going to do it. In an ideal world, would he like to? Probably, but he's not going to do that.
Yeah, and at the beginning of the war, what he's doing now wasn't even really on the table, right? I mean, now you get the sense that he's just going to end this when he wants to, on his terms. But originally, it was very, very simple. Ukraine had to promise not to join NATO. They had to recognize those eastern regions as independent, and they had to recognize the Crimea as Russian, and that would have been that. That would have been that.
Right.
Russia offered Ukraine those terms even after the fighting started. It might be too late. I mean, it is, not might be. It is too late to settle on those terms now. And so now Europe has to ask itself, what do we keep this going for? That's why, man.
Well, maybe
Spain
not.
says,
maybe
we'll
not.
go as high as 2.1. That's it.
Mi amigo Keaton.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Va a España
Yeah.
en el otoño.
Yeah.
Seriously, we're talking about it. But yeah, I don't know that it's too late for that, but there just seems to be this death drive to just keep this freaking war going, man. I honestly, I'm a little surprised that without the Americans, the Europeans will not sit down and try to settle this.
Yeah. Yep. Pretty crazy.
Please clap.